Hello, class. Welcome to week five. I'm hoping that you guys had a good time shooting on the streets without permission. Of course, when it comes to street photography, not asking for permission, I think is one of the biggest obstacles in terms of actually taking street photographs because oftentimes having that initial aversion to approaching strangers is the difficult part. But remember just to smile and say thank you. And generally speaking, you don't have that many issues. So for week five, I want to talk a little bit about classic street photographers. So for this lecture, we're going to be covering several classic street photographers. Of course, it's not going to be a comprehensive list of all the classic street photographers out there, of course. However, these are some of the most influential street photographers from around, I would say, the 1920s to the 1950s, up to the 70s. And it's a good way to understand what actually a good street photograph is by looking at the masters and looking at some of the classic work that's been done before. So when you're looking at these images, kind of try to analyze them a little bit, get inside the photographers' heads, and begin to learn a little bit more about how to become a better street photographer, of course. So we're going to start with Henri Cartier-Bresson. He was actually, he shot for quite a while. He shot from mostly the 1920s up to the 1980s. He was Hungarian. One of the first photographers who really emphasized composition in a photograph. Before that, it wasn't really that highly stressed or very rigorous. He was also the for how do I say? He was the forefather of Henri Cartier-Bresson, who is probably the most famous figure in street photography. But the interesting thing is Henri Cartier-Bresson actually looked up to Kertesz for his work, so we'll look a little bit more about him. So these are some quotes by Henri Cartier, which I think are great where it applies to street photography. First quote: "Seeing is not enough. You have to feel what you photograph." So I think this is important because oftentimes we always think about photography as just taking photos, but not only seeing with your eyes, but seeing with your heart is really important. Second quote: "I just walk around observing the subject from various angles until the picture elements arrange themselves into a composition that pleases my eye." I think this is another great quote because it kind of reminds you that when you're taking photographs, don't just take photographs from one angle. Try different angles, crouching down, getting lower, a little bit left, a little bit to the right. Last quote about him that I found incredibly inspirational. So, Mr. Kertesz was known for his drive and enthusiasm. At 90, he produced a portfolio of new photos and showed it to this photographer, Susan Maytel. When she asked him what it was that kept him working, he replied, "I'm still hungry." This was actually written in his obituary. So, of course, a man who had a lot of drive and ambition, and kind of a reminder that age is not the most important thing when it comes to photography, but really just the passion and the drive. So, let's look at some of his images. So, one of his most famous images, if you look at the images, one of the fascinating things to note is that you have this train passing up on here, and you have this man walking here. So the interesting thing is that if you actually look at the photographs, the series he took these photographs, he has several photographs of the same scene. Some of them do not have this train up here, and some of them do not have this man down here. So obviously, when he took this photograph, he kind of made a mental note, like, "Hey, I want to come back here and take this photograph," and he was able to get the time just right when the train was passing over on top, and this mysterious man with the hat and what actually appears to be a painting was walking by. So sometimes being patient is really important. It's actually going to be the experiment this week is standing at the busy intersection for 20 minutes, photographing what comes to you rather than always chasing the photograph. Take a look at this photograph. Think about what compositional elements work well in this photograph. Think about the elements. Think about how the photograph makes you feel. So the first thing, of course, you'll see is this very strong diagonal line. It's very great in composition to have this element. And Not only that, but it's raining very heavily, of course, and by having a man with an umbrella, it really does set the mood and set the scene. Also, sometimes small details what make or balance a photograph is having these little cars here gives the man just a little bit more balance in the scene, and I think by having the car here, it doesn't look like water or a beach. You actually know it's a street. Another photograph, take a look at it, see what you find interesting. So, if you look at this image, the composition is just amazing. You have one, two, three, four, five subjects here. Oftentimes, odd number subjects make better photographs. It is just because, in composition, having odd numbers has more balance. And they're all placed at different spots in the frame, all kind of going different directions. Like this horse is kind of looking this way, this motorcycle is going this way, this man's walking this way, this cyclist is riding this way, this carriage is going this way. There's these streams of light. There's triangles all around the scene, triangle here, triangle there. So think about, for your own street photographs, the placement of your subjects to create a nicely balanced and well composed image. So take a look at this photograph, see if you can see the lines, the diagonals. So you can see there's just a ton of here. This diagonal here, this diagonal here, diagonal, diagonal, diagonal. This woman coming to the scene, diagonal here, diagonal, and I think what really makes this photograph is the very small detail. This man is sitting down here, and he's got a bit of a hat, and you can see the silhouette. So think about, when it comes to your photography, combining architecture, lines, shadows, and most importantly, people. Talking about photographs, how they make you feel. So if you look at this photograph, how does it make you feel? So the first thing you probably looked at is, of course, this bench here. It's kind of odd. It's broken. It's falling over in half. And you look over at the man, is kind of clutching his hands behind his back. So oftentimes in a photograph, capturing people's hands can often give you a better insight into their mind, what they're thinking about, what they're concerned about. So, typically if you think people grabbing their hands like this behind, they're either concerned, worried, thinking about something. And the interesting thing, the story behind this photograph is, when Kertesz was taking this photograph, he was actually going through a lot of depression and sadness in his life and confusion. So to him, this photograph was kind of saying that, is that this man looking at this broken bench was a self-reflection of kind of the confusion he might have been feeling in his life. You see, there's two ladies here in the background and all these other empty chairs, and you could kind of weave your own little story from that. Once again, I think street photography, not only do you want really low angles, but sometimes getting really high angles can create interesting perspectives. Photograph taken at the Eiffel Tower. So going on to Henri Cartier-Bresson. So here's the man himself with his Leica. He shot his work is mostly from the 20s all the way up to the 70s. People would argue that his work from the 20s up to the 40s is probably his most influential work. A lot of people think his pretty much the grandfather of street photography. Borrowed a lot of concepts and ideas from Kertesz. If you look at his photographs, really focus on geometry, lines, and that concept of the decisive moment, which is capturing the photo at the right exact moment. So once again, taking a look at some of his photos. I know we looked at some of them, but we'll look at them again. But before that, let's look at some of his quotes. So first quote: "The photograph itself doesn't interest me. I only want to capture a minute piece of reality." So thinking that it's not just about the photograph, but documenting real life. Second quote: "Think about the photo before and after, never during. The secret is to take your time. You mustn't go too fast. The subject must forget about you. Then, however, you must be very quick." So another quote that is kind of contradicting itself is that you have to be quick, but you have to be slow. You must take your time. You can't be too fast. But I think the most important thing to take out of this quote is this concept of paralysis by analysis, is that sometimes when we're shooting street photography, we overthink it and we forget to actually take the photograph. And by overthinking a scene, you're not actually going to take the photograph. Next quote. To me, photography is a simultaneous recognition in a fraction of a second of the significance of an event. So in street photography, things just happen so quickly here and there, but by understanding what makes a good street photograph, looking at a lot of good photographs, you kind of have a sense of, what you're kind of looking for. And by looking on the streets, and when you see that moment, having the intuition to click is really important. And of course, this last quote about the decisive moment. There is a creative fraction of a second when you are taking a picture. Your eye must see a composition or an expression that life itself offers you, and you must know with intuition when to click the camera. That is the moment the photographer is creative. Oop! The moment, once you miss it, it is gone forever. The interesting thing to note about Cartier-Bresson is that before he became a photographer, he actually started off very interested in painting, and never really considered photography as, an interesting way to create art. But he looked at one of these photographs by Munacci, and he said that looking at this picture made me suddenly realize that photography could reach eternity through the moment. And this was the moment. So, several naked boys running into the water. And let's look at some of his images. So, look at this image. How does it make you feel? What do you find interesting about it? So you see these nice frames within this frame. And I think the interesting message behind this photograph is that regardless of all this destruction, and this is taken post-World War II era, and these kids are just still playing, life goes on, and they're just having a blast. And if you look at the scene, he sees a scene, and he took probably 10 to 12 photos of the same scene. So if you see something really, really interesting going on, don't just take one photo and keep walking. Just stick around, keep clicking, and see what you can get. Once again, the famous photograph of the man jumping over the puddle. And you got this nice little ballerina here. Lovely reflection. Looking how proud this boy is. The decisive moment of the man going through the streets. A photograph, once again, very, very weird, very, very odd, very surrealistic, but very effective. Talking about him being a painter before a photographer, you see these people enjoying their time by the river, and this man just pouring a nice glass of wine here. If you just look at it, it just looks exactly like a romantic painting. Another photograph looking at the strong diagonal composition, 3 subjects, an odd number, all looking at the photographer, making you feel like you're really there. And once again, the transgender Spanish, person. So looking at this photograph, thinking about Paris. These 2 boys here, these 2 girls here, these 2 dogs here, these 2 men here. And if you think about this photograph, there's lots of great depth, because in all the way closest to you, you have this frame, and a little bit further back, you have here. So sometimes you just have to keep your eyes open, and opportunities will present themselves to you. A photograph he took in India, and once again looking for the hands, seeing this this lady here extending out her hands praying, and you can see she's reaching out to the gods, asking them to call to her prayer, having that message. And really just a very, very atmospheric shot, looking in the skies and looking in the background. Very lovely shot. Another great shot capturing the decisive moment. So this was taken in Greece. All this great geometry, all these great lines and shadows and doors, and having this one girl running here just really makes the shot. Once again, capturing the decisive moment. This photograph is actually interesting. So in street photography, of course you want a photograph that's very sharp and it's in focus and technically perfect, but this photo is actually significantly out of focus, yet it's a very effective image. It's in Spain through a bullpen, the bullfighting ring, and you have this man, very, very mysterious looking, almost a little sinister with this one reflection off his glasses. And it's a photograph. He took around 3 photos in this scene. So once again, if you see something interesting, try to take as many photos as you can. Of course, you don't want to just put your camera into auto mode and just rapid fire away, but if you see an interesting opportunity or moment, try to seize it and capture it. Another great scene is think about the composition. This nice little circle here, this triangle here, this girl running over, you have a little bit of light here. So really trying to set up the scene, and sometimes just waiting for it is the best way to take photos. Robert Doisneau is another photographer that I really like. He shot a lot in Paris in the 30s into the 50s, and took a lot of photos of kind of everyday life, kids in the street having a good time. And, thinking about his influences, Cartier-Bresson, Kertesz, and his photos are very modest, very playful, very amusing. And he described himself as a pretty shy person. Two of his quotes. The first one, "The marvels of daily life are so exciting, no movie director could arrange the unexpected that you find in the street." So the great thing about street photography is that you really cannot prearrange anything, and it is so unexpected and so wonderful the moments you capture. The second quote, "Chance is the one thing you can't buy. You have to pay for it, and you have to pay for it with your life. Spending a lot of time, you pay for it with time. Not the wasting of time, but the spending of time." So a lot of creating a great street photograph or photography is just spending a lot of time doing it, investing a lot of energy into it. And the more time you invest in it, of course, you're going to get better results. So take a look at some of these images. So boys playing in the street. Got 2 boys here, 2 boys here. Another classic photo in Paris. All these kids holding hands, or not hands really, holding each other's jackets. This might remind you of when you were a kid. Once again, capturing the decisive moment. Kids playing around, kids being kids. Playing a little bit of ding dong ditch. Another photograph. Kid obviously looking very lost, very confused. Kind of reminds you when you're a kid, and you got this kid looking over, cheating on his paper. So think about which student you were growing up. Another photograph, a sign, a caution sign for walking people. And you have all these kids, and this kid just climbing up all the way to the top, and you can see that this photo was taken at a very high and unusual perspective. My guess is that he took this photo from one of those double-decker buses in Paris. Not 100% sure, but that's my guess. Sometimes just looking for an interesting, scene. Of course, this painting with this lady in the butt, very lovely. And he waited behind the storefront and waited for people's reactions. And of course, this is just priceless. This woman looking straight over, and this woman maybe perhaps looking at this image right here. So sometimes waiting and being patient can create incredible photographs. Really, really the small details that make or break the photograph. So this photograph is really this little bird over this little boy's head, and all these kids, in the restroom doing their business. Nowadays, you take this photo, you might be called a pedophile, but back then, I guess it wasn't so bad, but it still makes it very amusing and a very, very lively photo. This photo is probably posed, but regardless, a very effective image. You have this man lying down, kind of looks like Popeye. He's got a bunch of tattoos. He might be a sailor, blowing out a bit of smoke and looking up at all these lovely ladies right here. Helen Levitt. So she's another street photographer, female street photographer. She did a lot of work in New York City in the 30s to the 60s. Some of her influences were Cartier-Bresson, another photographer, Walker Evans. We'll talk about him later. She, very similar to Robert Doisneau, took a lot of photos of children, street culture, and chalk drawings. So, to some of her quotes: "Since I'm inarticulate, I express myself with images. I looked at paintings for composition. I go where there's a lot of activity." So you can see that her quotes are not super in depth, and I think that kind of reflects who she is as a person. Is that she never really liked a lot of attention from the media. She kind of kept to herself, and I think that she's one of the most underrated photographers out there. It seems she doesn't have as much, you know, you know, widespread acclaim as she deserves. She was a great photographer. She did a series on taking photos of chalk drawings that children did, and once again, it's an interesting project that shows that you don't necessarily have to take photographs of people to make an interesting photograph, but sometimes things that remind you of humanity. So putting yourself into the scene and thinking of when you're drawing the photo or drawing this kind of chalk drawing, what you must have thought when you were a kid, what was important, how you saw the world. Got this little kid's hand right here, probably drawing next to it, and you look at this. Not 100% sure what it is. It kind of looks like a spaceman. It might be like a rocket man or a robot. To me, it looks like a toaster with wings and legs. But thinking about the creativity that children have. Another photograph that I love is two kids playing on the streets, but to me, this is more of a social image in the sense that it kind of reminds me that when you're kids, you don't think about race or color, and you're blind to color, and you got this white girl and this little um, Afro-American kid playing in the streets together. Another photograph, a bunch of kids doing something they probably shouldn't be doing. Pretty dangerous. This kid's climbing up, trying to get the balance. This kid's trying to push this kid over. That's not good because if he pushes them over, they're all gonna fall down. And you got this kid here just playing lookout, watching for anyone to report their suspicious activity. Kids being kids. This kid looks like he wants to, or he or she wants to fly. Another photograph that I love is that you look at this photograph, you kind of know who's going to be who, right? You got the kid who just kind of tags along. He's going to be the follower. He's going to be the boss. He looks like he loves the attention. This guy looks like kind of like the pretty boy, and this guy right here is probably going to be the tough guy. Kids in Halloween, all dressed up, very very cute. These photos really make you smile. Inappropriate. Um, Once again, a photograph you might be called a pedophile nowadays for taking, but once again, showing the curiosity of children. So looking at this photo, what is this a photo of? So when I first looked at this photo, I actually thought this was a reflection, but it's actually an empty mirror, and of course this kid with the tricycle is perfectly framed here. Sad thing is nowadays you don't really see kids playing on the streets a lot like this. So think about your photography as being able to capture history because nowadays kids just stay home, play their Xboxes or video games, or always on the computer. Never actually go outside and play anymore. It's actually quite sad. And a photograph of a girl looking down, something in the gutter. She might have dropped her toy or something. Not quite sure. Robert Frank, a very influential photographer. He did a project titled The Americans, and he was actually from Switzerland. And his project was kind of an outsider's view looking into American society. He traveled all around America on a Guggenheim grant. So if you look at these images, they're all just photographs of America, and they're very, very dark, very mysterious. Looking at this photograph, you have the American flag, a very strong symbol. And this person just obscured, and this person's face partially obscured. It's the first photograph in the book, and it kind of sets the scene. A photograph of a funeral taken in the South. So a very, very gloomy image. They're all just kind of wearing really, really nice clothes. Have these classic looking cars. This look of, just kind of, dread, concern. And this man here, I could never quite put my finger on the expression, but he might be, has something on his mind, has some kind of, maybe a little bit of hope. Not 100% sure, but a very interesting image. Classic image of a cowboy. very American. You have his lighting up a cigarette. He's got his hat and his pants and his jeans and his boots. Very classic. Another interesting image is that you have all these people at the counter just ordering food and stuff like that. An interesting social thing to notice is that it appears that everyone working is African American and all the people at the counter are white. Once again, looking at how cheap everything used to be back in the day, 10 cents. Another photo that's very has a lot of social motifs in it is that you have, this is when buses were still segregated. You have all these white people in the front of the bus and the black people at the back of the bus. And the center of the image, you have this boy. He's really well dressed and he's got this look of concern and kind of fear in his face. And this little girl is kind of crying, screaming out. And this black man looks very glazed and very concerned. And their postures almost mimic one another. And it kind of gives you a very dark and gloomy sense. Just kind of makes you wonder what's going through the heads. Photograph that makes you really think. Another photograph of a woman, presumably a nanny, holding a child, and you can see again is this contrast between the black and white, and she's kind of looking out, kind of wandering off into space, not quite sure what's on her mind, and even the baby's looking kind of the other way with something on his or her mind as well. A political rally. Vote for me. A very dreamy, romantic time in the park. Classic cars. People talking, people kissing, having a good time. Another photographer that is female, Vivian Maier. So this is a picture of her. And very incredible story is that she shot a lot in the 50s and the 60s. And that's where people consider her best work. She was a nanny working nearly her entire life, and what she would do is whenever she had spare time, she would just go out and take photos, and created an incredible body of work. And it wasn't until maybe 5 years ago that she was discovered by by a historian, a local historian named John Maloof in Chicago, and she was a very very unknown photographer that shot around 40 years in Chicago. And when they finally discovered her, they were like, wow, she was a photographer. They never showed any of her images her entire life. And when they stumbled upon her images, they found out that she was an amazing photographer. Taking a look at some of her images. Very, very close, very, very personal. Looking at this image, you could feel the music in the scene. Thinking about juxtaposition, so of course you got a very very overweight man very next to a very very skinny man. So trying to look for these differences in your images can create powerful images. Little boy just kind of hanging out. He's got a very curious look on his face. Kids playing in a box. Once again, very very classic. Man lying down in his car. He's got his hat propped here, and it's just a very, 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 daydreamy like image. You kind of just want to lie down there and sleep yourself. A man on a horse riding through the streets of Chicago. If you guys ever been to Chicago, they have this thing called the L. It's their subway system that loops all around central Chicago, and it's called the L because it's elevated and it makes a very nice backdrop. Another lovely photograph. This very exquisite woman looking past. She's got her fur coat and she's got this little veil over her eye. Very beautiful. Tough guy. Once again, a portrait taken very very close to her subject. Really nice photo. It's taken at night. You got this what looks like a ballerina just kind of giving up this glow, and you got this classic car in the back and you have these lights. Once again, just really capturing the mood and the essence of the, the, moment. A mom Kid crying, a little doll. She doesn't seem too amused. Alfred Eisenstaedt, another photographer, is very classic. Worked for Life magazine for many, many years, from the 30s all the way to the 70s. He was German American. And if you guys are very familiar with this photograph, you guys almost have all probably seen this photograph. So, photograph that he took the victory over Japan Day. This soldier was walking around, and the way the story is told by Alfred Eisenstaedt is that he was walking around looking for photos to take, and the sailor would just kind of was walking around taking photos of every single girl he came across, and he finally came across with this nurse, just bent over and kissed her, and this photo was, arguably one of the most famous images taken in history. A photo I love, kids watching a puppet play. Just look at how much fun and excitement they're having, and look at just their expression. This kid is cheering out. This kid covering his ears. She looks like she's kind of afraid. This kid's amazed, and this kid is just kind of freaking out. So once again, the energy of children. Very elegant ballerinas just waiting next to the window, looking out. You have all these waiters looking out of this very fancy looking restaurant or hotel. What they're actually looking at is there's a world-class female figure skater that came to visit in town. It was actually figure skating outside. A photograph that he took at a very, very fancy opera hall. And what he described taking this photo is that first he was looking at the scene and it looked interesting, but it wasn't quite there. And he looked around, and he saw this lady just kind of resting her head, and he's like, perfect. He framed it slightly more to the right and took the photograph, and it's what really made the photograph. So having all these subjects in the background, but having that one central subject as an anchor, crucial. He took a lot of photos of social issues once again. If you look at them, they're praying, about to do grace before enjoying their meal. So if you look at their meal, you know, food looks, very modest, nothing too crazy. They're probably not very well off. The walls behind them, they look like they live in a very modest house. So the message the photograph might give you is that even though you might be struggling, having a hard time, still being grateful for the things you do have is really important. Last image, a photograph taking in Hiroshima. It's a photograph that really does grip you by the heart. Is that you just see all the destruction from the bomb. This mother just looks like she just has no more energy, no more life, and this child here just that look of concern. Oops, that wasn't the last image. Well, let me go back to that last image. So, if you guys don't know who this guy is, his Goebbels, his the propaganda minister for Hitler during the Holocaust, and he took this photograph really, really close, and you can see the stare that he's giving him. It's like a very, very evil, sinister stare, and kind of reminds you that you have a sense of who he is as a person through this photograph. So yeah, this is an overview of all these famous street photographers who are a lot more classic. Consider some of their images, their styles, their thoughts when you're out shooting. They're a very solid foundation to base your street photography on. And of course, the most important thing is go out and shoot.